John D. Rockefeller didn't invent the oil refinery. He invented something far more dangerous: the spreadsheet. By 1890, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of America's oil refining capacity. Not the wells, not the crude, the refineries. And here's the trick: most business historians spend decades explaining Rockefeller's genius as visionary leadership, vertical integration, or ruthless competition. The real story is much simpler and much darker. It's about where the money actually went, and why one man's accounting obsession dismantled an entire industry structure. Let's start with the accepted version. Rockefeller was a brilliant strategist who consolidated a fragmented oil market. Oil refining in the 1870s was chaotic. Hundreds of small refineries competed on price. Margins collapsed. Refineries failed constantly. Rockefeller saw an opportunity: consolidate, achieve economies of scale, and dominate. Clean story, American success narrative, mostly true. But here's where the narrative breaks. Yes, Standard Oil did consolidate refineries. By 1882, the company had absorbed or squeezed out competitors across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. The official story stops there. Efficiency won. The market rewarded scale. Capitalism worked. Except the mechanics of how Standard Oil actually destroyed competition weren't about better technology or lower costs. They were about something far more surgical. Rockefeller's real weapon was railroad rebates. And here's the trick: almost no one talks about this anymore because it sounds boring, but follow the money. Standard Oil negotiated secret deals with railroad companies, specifically the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central. When Standard Oil shipped oil, they paid less per barrel than competitors, sometimes significantly less. A small independent refinery in Cleveland paid, say, 40 cents per barrel to ship refined oil to New York. Standard Oil paid 30 cents or sometimes even received a rebate, meaning the railroad paid them. That 10-cent advantage compounded across thousands of barrels. Suddenly, Standard Oil could undercut competitors on price while maintaining margins. Competitors couldn't match it. They didn't have the volume. They didn't have the negotiating power. But there's another layer. Standard Oil also controlled the pipeline infrastructure. They didn't just refine oil, they moved it. And when competitors tried to ship through Standard-owned pipelines, they faced delays, higher tolls, or outright refusal. A competitor's crude couldn't reach a refinery efficiently. Their refined product couldn't reach customers. The system was rigged, and the rig was invisible because it lived in logistics, not in boardrooms. Now here's where the real accounting comes in. Standard Oil's actual profit margins on refining weren't exceptional. They were decent, but not extraordinary. The extraordinary wealth came from controlling the distribution system, the railroads, the pipelines, the storage terminals. They made money on the movement of oil, not just its transformation. By 1900, Standard Oil's market share had actually peaked and begun to slip slightly. But the company was worth roughly $1 billion, an almost unimaginable sum at the time. Not because they invented better refining, but because they'd built an economic moat so deep that competitors couldn't survive. And they'd done it by controlling the infrastructure between the well and the customer. This is where the real explanation departs from the textbook version. The accepted story says Rockefeller was a monopolist who crushed competitors through sheer ruthlessness or innovation. But the actual mechanism was subtler. He identified that the refining industry's vulnerability wasn't in production, it was in the middle: transportation, storage, logistics. He didn't dominate by being a better refiner. He dominated by controlling what happened between refining and selling. By 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil to dissolve. The company was broken into 34 separate entities. But here's the final trick: those 34 companies still controlled most of the oil industry's infrastructure. The dissolution was legally clean but economically hollow. Rockefeller became wealthier after the breakup than before it because the company's real assets, the pipelines, the terminals, the distribution networks, remained intact. The antitrust case against Standard Oil didn't fail because the court was weak. It failed because the court was trying to unscramble an egg that had already been fully integrated. You can't separate a company from the infrastructure it owns. You can't force a pipeline to serve competitors equally if the pipeline's owner is also a competitor. The legal system had no framework for it. This is the real legacy. Standard Oil didn't teach America about monopoly power through raw market dominance. It taught a generation of lawyers, regulators, and economists that monopoly power lives in infrastructure control, in the network, in the pipes and rails that competitors depend on. That lesson shaped every major antitrust action that followed: railroads, telecommunications, tech platforms. The same pattern. Rockefeller's true genius wasn't ruthlessness or innovation. It was understanding that in a commoditized industry, profit doesn't live in production, it lives in control of the flow. He didn't need to own every well or every refinery. He needed to own the choke point. And once he did, competition became mathematically impossible, not because he was stronger, but because the system was asymmetrical. When you understand this mechanism, you see it everywhere. Modern monopolies rarely dominate through product superiority. They dominate through control of the distribution layer, the payment layer, the data layer, whatever sits between producers and consumers. Standard Oil's breakup didn't solve that problem. It just renamed it. And 110 years later, we're still trying to regulate the same pattern. The Standard Oil story isn't a historical footnote. It's a blueprint for how economic power actually concentrates in industrial systems, not through innovation or scale alone, but through control of the middle. Once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it, and that's the real lesson that antitrust law is still trying to learn. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe for the business models and strategic decisions that shaped industries. There's a new structural breakdown every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.